What is the cost of success? Who or what are we willing to leave behind to reach the top of the mountain we are all climbing?
Surveying time. I want no one else to succeed.
Oh,
Sit down.
suck on this.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Character Psychology. Today we will be examining Daniel Plainview from Paul Thomas Anderson's masterpiece, There Will Be Blood. This character is perfectly portrayed by Daniel Day-Lewis, who provides a chilling performance of a wealthy oil tycoon in the early 1900s. First, before we summarize the film, spoiler alert for those who have not seen the movie. The film opens in 1898 with Daniel Plainview alone in a silver mine. There is no dialogue for almost 15 minutes. Daniel breaks his leg in a fall, crawls back to the town dragging himself, later transitions from silver mining into oil drilling. This opening establishes something important. Daniel is self-made, physically tough, and absolutely relentless. Pain does not stop him. During a drilling accident, a worker is killed. Daniel adopts the man's infant son and raises him as his own. He begins presenting himself to towns as a family man, oil man. Later on, a man named Paul Sunday tells Daniel about oil on his family's land in Little Boston, California. Daniel travels there with H.W., his son, and confirms the oil potential. He manipulates the Sunday family into selling the land cheaply by pretending he's only interested in quail hunting. This is where we meet Eli Sunday, Paul's twin brother. Eli is a young preacher who runs the Church of the Third Revelation. Eli wants money and recognition for blessing the oil bow. Daniel refuses to give him public credit. Right away, a rivalry forms. Business power versus religious authority. After Daniel begins drilling, the well explodes dramatically. H.W. is caught in the blast and becomes deaf. This moment is pivotal. Daniel initially shows concern, but as H.W.'s deafness makes business communication harder, Daniel becomes distant and frustrated. As Daniel struggles to deal with H.W., a man arrives to a small home in Little Boston, claiming to be his brother, Henry Plainview. They discuss how Henry made it to Little Boston and his life beforehand. They speak of their family and parents, and during a late-night conversation, Daniel expresses his hatred for people and the competition that lives within him. Henry shows no relation to this hatred, instead showing dismay towards his lack of success. As Henry and Daniel sleep, H.W. sets a fire in the house. As Henry attempts to put out the fire, Daniel chases after H.W. Eventually, he sends H.W. away to a school for the deaf. H.W. screams and tries to run after him as Daniel leaves him on a train. This is one of the coldest moments in the film. It marks Daniel choosing ambition over fatherhood. As Daniel and Henry spend more time together, Daniel slowly becomes more suspicious of Henry until one night he realizes this is not his brother. Daniel awakens Henry at gunpoint and demands to know who he is. Henry reveals that he is not in fact his brother, and that he had worked with him for a time, but he had died of tuberculosis. He continues that he had used his brother's diary to pretend to be him. Henry begs for his life, but soon enough, Daniel shoots him in the head and buries his body on Bandy's land. Later, Daniel is awakened by a gunshot fired by William Bandy, the man who Daniel needs the land of. Bandy reveals he knows of Henry's murder. Bandy then forces Daniel to join Eli's church and publicly confess his sins in order to get the land. In a church scene filled with humiliation and pain, Eli makes Daniel shout, "I've abandoned my child. I've abandoned my boy." Daniel is visibly furious and broken, but submits because he needs the land. This moment deeply wounds his pride and deepens his hatred for Eli and religion. HW returns years later. HW returns as a young adult, now confident and able to communicate in sign language. Years later, he tells Daniel he wants to start his own oil company in Mexico. Daniel explodes. He tells HW he was adopted and that he was just a business tool. "You're not my son," he says. This is pure narcissistic injury. HW's independence feels like a betrayal. HW leaves him. Daniel is now completely alone. In the final scene, the film jumps forward again. Daniel is now extremely wealthy and living in isolation in a massive mansion. He's an alcoholic. He bowls alone in a private bowling alley. Eli visits him, desperate for money. He admits his church has failed and that he needs Daniel's help. Daniel humiliates him, forces him to admit he's a false prophet, and reveals that he already drained the oil from Eli's land years ago using directional drilling. Then Daniel beats Eli to death with a bowling pin. Daniel's assistant enters as Daniel exclaims, "I'm finished." This story reveals many aspects of Daniel's personality: his lack of empathy, his narcissism, his rage, and his drive towards success. Daniel, on a surface level, is a capitalist tycoon who is self-made, a single father, and a driven worker. However, below this, the viewer sees who he truly is. Daniel seems to show several sets of personality traits: narcissism, antisocial behavior, and misanthropy. Starting with Daniel's narcissistic personality, Daniel is extremely self-centered and selfish. He shows little to no care about those around him. He's extremely focused on greed and success and views others as beneath him. Daniel is also incredibly sensitive to humiliation and will save his anger towards those who humiliate him in the past to destroy them with later, like what he did with Eli. Daniel's relationships are also incredibly exploitive, such as his with HW or with the Sunday family. Any sort of rejection or competition fuels a fire of betrayal in Daniel, leading to a blind rage. Relationships to Daniel are not about connection, but transaction. Next, we will focus on Daniel's antisocial traits. Daniel is incredibly manipulative and will use his power against anyone to get what he wants, even his own son. He shows little to no remorse for the pain and suffering he causes others, even after the murders he commits. Daniel commonly uses deception to get what he wants and doesn't seem to have a strong sense of morality. Lastly, we will touch upon Daniel's misanthropy. Daniel has plainly stated that he hates most people. He also tends to spend his time alone by choice, and by the end of the film, he lives in his enormous mansion completely alone besides his assistant. Daniel explains to Henry that he, quote, sees the worst in people, unquote. This way of thinking highlights Daniel's depressive and narrow worldview. For Daniel, the world is dog eat dog, natural selection. All of these traits outline two known mental health conditions: narcissistic personality disorder, specifically malignant narcissism, and antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. Those suffering from narcissistic personality disorder typically show a sense of grandiosity, a strong reaction to humiliation, and the use of others as pawns. Daniel also shows a general hatred for humanity while attempting to serve himself solely. For ASPD, those suffering from it typically show a lack of remorse for action, criminal actions, explosive anger, manipulation, lack of empathy, and impulsive behavior. Though not a recognized diagnosis, the DSM-5, Daniel exhibits personality traits associated with sociopaths. Sociopathy and psychopathy are both sets of personality traits that commonly overlap with the diagnosis of ASPD. The difference between a psychopath and sociopath is that psychopaths tend to be more decisive and cold. They are completely unable to show empathy and tend to be very glib and emotionless. Psychopaths are typically that way from birth. Sociopaths tend to be more explosive and emotional. They also show a lack of empathy and a strong manipulative tool belt, but are more impulsive and less stable. Sociopaths tend to be created from their environment. Daniel seems to fall into the sociopath checklist more so than psychopathy. Daniel is explosive at some points, even resorting to murder to express his anger. Uses others for his own gain, shows minimal connection to others, and has strong manipulative tendencies. Other small details I noticed about Daniel's character are Daniel seems to have come from an impoverished and/or fractured background. His family seems to be split and does not come from much money. Daniel frequently sleeps on the floor of his homes, even if there's a bed available, maybe showing comfort in an action he is used to. Perhaps he slept on the floor as a child. Daniel is also an alcoholic, maybe coping with his misanthropic feelings and loneliness with alcohol. Daniel does have the ability to care for others, such as HW or Henry, but these relationships are shallow and loveless. Daniel shows genuine concern for HW during his injury and shows Henry some compassion. This again is typical of a sociopath, not a psychopath. What are we willing to do for success? Who or what are we willing to leave behind to reach the top of the mountain? This story is about a man who answered those questions, who left his family, friends, and morals behind to achieve success. Thank you for viewing this episode of Character Psychology.